The Supremes go negative on affirmative action. I'm John Phillips, and this is After Hours. But before we get to all of that, it's time to hand out this week's Underwood Award.
Everyone is fair game now, and the butchery begins.
And as you probably know by now, every week on After Hours, we pick someone who's the worst of the worst and deserves to be elevated to the level of our favorite truly rotten, evil, dastardly, conniving political villain in the TV show The House of Cards, Francis J. Underwood. Today's winner is a Russian politician and ally of Vladimir Putin, who was giving a press conference on the unrest in the Ukraine when he was asked a relatively innocuous question about whether Russia should pursue diplomacy with Ukraine by a young female reporter from Russia Today. He responded by calling Ukrainians nymphomaniacs and noticing that the reporter was also visibly pregnant, so he called her a nymphomaniac too. She liked it at least once. This caused some muttering in the press corps. Then he went completely berserk, if that wasn't enough. He did so by pushing two of his flunkies towards the woman and telling them, quote, "When I say you run to her and violently rape her," end quote. When they hesitated, he shouted, "Go and kiss her, grab her," end quote. When one of the flunkies reached out, presumably to do just that, another female journalist intervened, but our winner yelled at her too. He said, "What are you doing here? Are you a lesbian? Get out of here," end quote. He since apologized, but the pregnant reporter has been hospitalized for treatment of psychological trauma, and even though he offered to pay her hospital bills, today's ignominious recipient of the After Hours Underwood Award is the Deputy Speaker of the Russian Parliament, Vladimir Zhirinovsky. There he is. And boy, he's a prize, isn't he? This is the man who wanted his aides to rape a pregnant reporter because he didn't like the tone of a question she asked. Congratulations, Vlad, you dirtbag. And in case you can't see, Tammy Bruce is scowling at him too. Now you can see. And now it's time to get to today's main event. The Supreme Court decided to uphold the rights of states to ban affirmative action. The vote was 6-2, and shockingly, Clinton appointee Stephen Breyer joined the conservative majority in striking a blow to race-based preferences. Speaking for the majority, Anthony Kennedy wrote the following, quote, "This case is not about how the debate about racial preferences should be resolved. It's about who may resolve it. There's no authority in the Constitution of the United States or in the court's precedents for the judiciary to set aside Michigan laws that commit this policy determination to the voters," end quote. This is huge because affirmative action has been a box office bust whenever it's been put before voters, even in liberal states like right here in California, Michigan, and Washington State. The truth is that the political will has never been there for affirmative action. The courts have been the last holdout on this particular issue. And now that they're starting to fold, race-based preferences will be right behind them. And that's a good thing. Here to kick this around is our After Hours panel. She's the host of the Tammy Bruce radio show, which you can get online at tammybruce.com. Tammy Bruce. He's the very fair-minded civil rights defense attorney, who you can get online at clearthecourt.com, Mr. Leo Terrell. And he's the PJTV contributor from his home studio in the great state of Pennsylvania, whose political satire books are available at Amazon.com, Mr. Scott Ott. And Leo, you're the civil rights attorney. We'll start with you on this one.
All righty.
You better be fair.
I'm going to be fair-minded.
All right. So the courts dealt a big blow to affirmative action, and a Clinton appointee was part of the majority. Did that part of it surprise you?
No, let me tell you right now, legally the ruling was correct. It basically said, can the voters decide whether or not a state can have race-based preference, not just the courts. Legally the ruling is correct. Now, here's the issue. There is still discrimination in this country. That's a fact. I was a proud recipient of affirmative action. I went to UCLA Law School. I passed the bar the first time I graduated. But I think it's very, very important to understand the separation here. That decision was absolutely correct, And yet, for anyone to deny the existence of racial discrimination and the need to have some type of assistance is living in a foxhole.
You know, Tammy, a very smart person once told me where you stand depends on where you sit. And a lot of conservatives or a lot of Republicans go bad when they go on the court because they want to give themselves more power and more authority and get the courts involved in more issues. But in this particular case, the court said, we're taking our hands off this. This is a political issue that can be decided by legislatures and voters. That part really struck me as a bit bizarre because they really gave more power to the people and took it away from themselves.
Yeah, the big strike here is the argument, part of the argument was that it would be unconstitutional to take away affirmative action or race-based preferences. It really wasn't even classic affirmative action, of course, which is outreach. This was about preferences, race preferences. So what they were saying was, oh, well, it's unconstitutional to not have it. What the court has said is that that's bunk. You cannot have race-based preferences. It's not unconstitutional, and voters can make the decision. Now, what Thomas said, and this is what I agree with, is that, in fact, they should have gone further. They should have said race-based preferences are unconstitutional themselves. And then Sotomayor said, look, she was horrified by this. Her argument was, well, no, we can't let the people decide about race-based preferences. So even though it was a 6-2 decision, Scalia and Thomas came up on the end saying this is ridiculous, that we do have the power to say race-based preferences are unconstitutional. They didn't do that. But on the other hand, they kind of punted. They said, well, we're not going to declare it that, the majority said. We're going to just say that the people can decide and that there's no constitutional basis.
Well, that's a backdoor way of getting it, though, isn't it?
It is, but it still then does not at least put into the record and determine constitutionally that saying what a person can do based on their race is unconstitutional. A lot of people want that in the record, so it kind of leaves the other dynamics somewhat open.
Let me just simply say this, and for anyone to close the door on race-based preferences, and I believe that people should not be judged on race, but Clarence Thomas was a recipient of affirmative action. Let's just put that on the record. And I just think it's a little disingenuous for somebody who benefited to say, no, no more. But I agree. It should be left to the voters, and the decision was correct. So I'm sort of mixed with this decision.
Well, let's go to Scott here, because, Scott, right now, if you're a supporter of affirmative action, I don't know where you go, because you're losing at the ballot box, even in blue states. You're losing. There's not the political will, at least in the Congress of the United States, to put this up for a vote. And now the courts have said, you know what, we're taking our hands off this. Where do they go from here? It seems to me like they're really between a rock and a hard place.
Well, where I'd like to see them go is to individual merit, is to character, is to encouraging young people that they are going to make it in this country, not because of what color they are or what religion they are or anything else like that, but by their accomplishments, by their abilities, by their willingness to do the hard work. And we know, we grant, I mean, the Founding Fathers never thought that everybody starts off on a level playing field. You know, we have equality under law in this country, but that doesn't mean everybody is born in the same circumstances or equal circumstances. I think this case, by the way, says more about federalism, and it says more about the rights of the people to determine their future than it really does about race-based preferences. And I hope that this gets applied on a broader scale. And one more thing. The line of white guys who wanted to be sitting in that chair where Leo Terrell is right now is just full of bitterness and vitriol.
That's right. I'm so glad. I'm in the chair. I'm in the chair. Yay! Thanks. You're right.
Larry H. Parker is going to make some negative comments on this video, Leo.
I'm in the chair now.
All right. Now, Leo, let's talk about the politics of this.
Yes.
Because here in California, there's a state assemblyman, a Latino guy from the San Gabriel Valley, who decided that he wanted to overturn Proposition 209 through legislation in Sacramento. And it passed one of the houses, it passed the state Senate, and it was going to the Assembly when you had mutiny on the Democratic side of the aisle, because you had Asian members of the state legislature have their phone lines blow up because their constituents were saying, wait a minute, this is going to screw our kids over. How can Asian people who are in the state legislature vote to screw over Asian kids? And so Asian Democrats said, we want this thing DOA, we're not going to support it, and then the legislation was killed. Now is what you have is you have Latino legislators killing the legislation of the Asians as payback for the Asians killing this bill, and now they've gone to war with each other.
The biggest beneficiary of the elimination of the Prop 209 are the Asians in the university. Their numbers have skyrocketed. So this is what you're fighting over. You're fighting over now minorities fighting among themselves as the majority laugh and say, look at you guys. This is a Prop 209 has benefited Asians in all university numbers at the detriment of Latinos and African Americans. Look, as far as I'm concerned, I agree with Scott on this. Merit has a lot to play into this. The key here is the recognition that everyone does not start at the same level.
Were you surprised to see Asian Democrats flip on this issue and do so in a very loud, very public way?
I think finally, when you're looking at issues, especially for politicians that hit home, they get it. Very often they're doing things that's theoretical or it's beyond them or there's a disconnect and it doesn't affect them. In these cases, suddenly there's a connection with their own personal lives, and we're seeing it with a whole lot of political issues these days. Obamacare, the Keystone Pipeline, that when there are things that get very close, suddenly Democrats, because they're all politicians ultimately are opportunists, suddenly want to do the right thing. But this is in a very important situation as well. When we talk about merit, we can start looking at here in California, why are the Asian kids doing better? And why are Latinos and blacks not? And is it because maybe some are relying more on public school than others? So how can we address this issue of merit when you've got a real line of an issue involving people of color and there are those differences?
Well, Scott, how about that? You're a guy who puts your name on the ballot. You put yourself out there. You put together winning coalitions that'll help you get into office. If you're a Democratic politician and a significant portion of your political base has a serious problem with this, and they're killing legislation in the state legislature, that's got to get your attention, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, I think so. I mean, I'll give you an example from here locally. In the city that's just about 5 miles away from where I'm sitting, the Democrats actually gerrymandered what they call a majority-minority district. The idea was about half the people in Allentown speak Spanish at home, and so we should craft a district there so that those folks are represented more fairly in the state legislature. And the Democrats were successful at carving out that district. And now the Democrats have nominated the guy to run for that seat, and his last name has a very German sound to it. It's kind of like my last name. And so even though they carved out this little district supposedly to give greater representation to Latinos, they've just gone back to the well of old crony politicians to put that guy into it. Look, you know, we're a country that was founded on individual ability and the ability to work together with other people to get things done. When I went to college back in the early 1980s, there was a guy, I think his name was actually Kurt Warner, but not the guy you're thinking of, and he was the star tailback for the Penn State football team. The reason why he was the star tailback for the Penn State football team is because he worked his butt off to get there. The interesting thing is he sat next to me in math class, and Kurt Warner worked his butt off in that class. He got an A, I got a C, and that's how it should work.
And that Kurt Warner was a guy who played on the Penn State team who beat, USC in a bowl game against Marcus Allen.
Oh, well, that'll ruin my night.
Rubbing salt in
I
that
had to roll
Leo. All right, well, that's going to do it for today. Leo Terrell, you get the last word. The fair-minded civil rights defense attorney who never passes up a shot to take a swing at the USC Trojans. Proud USC Trojan, Tammy Bruce. You can get her online at tammybruce.com. And Scott Ott, who doesn't have a dog in the fight when it comes to UCLA and USC, but you can buy his books online at amazon.com. If you'd like to comment on today's show, you can do so in the comments section below. For After Hours, I'm John Phillips. Thanks for watching.